God has a little chat with him and he says, well, why are you angry? And why are you upset? And Cain says, and God says, if you do well, won't you be accepted? And if you don't do well, sin lies at your door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. Okay, that's a very mangled translation, I would say. So I'm going to take it apart. So what God says is, well, you're angry and you're upset. It's like, well, what's your problem? And then God tells Cain, if you did things properly, they would work out for you. Well, it's the last thing he wants to hear, because what Cain wants to believe is that the reason he's not doing very well is because there's no sense having any faith in the Logos. The transcendent is evil and aimed exactly against him, and the entire social contract is faulty. That's what he wants to hear, but that isn't what God says. God says, well, wait a minute, maybe you're doing something wrong. Well, that's maybe a worse message than everything else is corrupt. It's like, you're having a problem because you're just not everything you could be. Well, and then God says something really nasty, and you can't tell from this lines. I read a bunch of translations to try to figure out exactly what it meant. So this is what God tells Cain. He says, you're in a room in a house, and there's something at the door. And he uses a metaphor, God uses a metaphor. It's a sexually aroused predatory cat. And you invite it in. You invite it in. You know that it has evil intent. You invite it in to mate with you, right? And its union with you, this malevolent force, its sexual union with you has produced an offspring. And that offspring is what possesses you. And so not only have you done something wrong, you've invited the spirit of wrongdoing into your life, and you've creatively intermingled it with it voluntarily to bring forth a monster of your own creation. So that's what God tells Cain. It's like, look, it's bad enough that God says, you know, you should get your act together, because maybe that's why things aren't going so well for you. Before you criticize the transcendent and the world and the structure of being, maybe you're doing something wrong. But it's worse than that. He says, not only are you doing something wrong, you bloody well know you're doing something wrong, and you're doing it creatively and with intent. So not only are things not going well for you, but you've played a creative role in producing that situation. And so God basically says, I am taking zero responsibility for rejecting your sacrifice. It's all on you. And so Cain leaves, and he's like seriously not happy with that response, because he wanted to hear, pat, pat, you're a victim of circumstance and everything's conspiring against you, and really, being God, I should get my act together and just give you what you want, because obviously, being God, I'm wrong and you're right. Well, that isn't what happens. It's exactly the opposite of that. It's completely on you. That's the judgment. And so Cain leaves, and believe me, he was wroth before, and his countenance had fallen before, but it's nothing like it is now. And so he hits the next stage, and he thinks, okay, I'm going to take my revenge. What am I going to do? I'm going to find the most innocent and worthwhile thing that's favored of God, and I'm going to kill it. And that's what he does. So, and it doesn't matter that it's his brother. And Abel, you know, we're drawing the inference, Abel's done the right things, everyone likes him, everything's flourishing for Abel, he's a good guy. He's one of those people that you meet that has everything, and then you meet them and you wish you could hate them, but you can't, because they're really good people, and then you really hate them. Because not only do they have everything, but it appears that they deserve it. And there's nothing that sort of sits in your soul and rots it more than that realization. And so that's the situation with Cain. And so Cain thinks, Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. So that's so interesting, because look what happens to Cain here. So he's not doing well, he's separated from the transcendent and from society, he's bitterly resentful, and now he goes out and kills the very thing that he most wants to be. So he destroys his own ideal, right? He demolishes his own ideal. That's how far his resentment has pushed him. And so he's done, right? But it doesn't matter, because it enables him to take revenge. So he doesn't care. It's like the suicidal school shooter that blows off his head at the end of his mayhem. It's like, it doesn't matter to him. It's part of the same art form. And the Lord says unto Cain, where is Abel thy brother? And Cain said, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Well, that's a good question. That's why it's posed in the story, because the answer to that is supposed to be yes. And God says, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries unto me from the ground. That's actually the motif that Dostoevsky explores, I would say, in Crime and Punishment, because what happens is that Raskolnikov is Cain for all intents and purposes, and he commits a murder, but he gets away with it. Well, so he thinks. So he thinks. No one suspects him. He buries the money. He can't stand to touch the money. He buries it in a abandoned lot, and he's drawn there now and then to look at where it is, but he can't touch it because the money, it's so funny because the money before he kills the pawnbroker is not the same as the money after he kills the pawnbroker. And the Raskolnikov before he kills the pawnbroker is not the same as the Raskolnikov after he kills the pawnbroker. In fact, they're not the same at all. And so Raskolnikov is tormented by God, you could say, but not from the external world. He sets the crime up quite nicely. It's that the spirit against which he transgressed tortures him from within. And there's no escape from it. And so eventually what happens in Crime and Punishment is Raskolnikov continues to manifest himself as guilty in every possible way until he receives the punishment that he desires, because it's the only way that he can set things right. He essentially turns himself in, eventually, because he can't tolerate what he's done. So that's the idea. Thy voice of thy brother's blood cries unto me from the ground. It's guilt. And now you're cursed from the earth, which has opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When you till the ground, it will not henceforth yield unto you its strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shall thou be in the earth. You know, and you might say, well, why does God not just strike Cain dead? And the answer to that perhaps is that wouldn't be sufficient punishment. And that's what it looks like to me. It's like, what's the punishment? You live with what you did. Right? And I don't want anybody taking you out either, because then you won't have to live with what you did. So that's the punishment. And Cain says unto the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. It's like, yeah. Behold, you have driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid. That's the same as what happens to Adam in the Garden of Eden. Remember, Adam hides from God, and he has his reasons. And now Cain is alienated from God. There's no reconstructing that relationship. He's put himself, by violating his contract, let's say, with the transcendent, and also with society, and also with his own spirit, he's put himself outside the possibility of redemption. And that's why he says, the punishment is greater than I can bear. There's no hope left, right? So he's in hell for all intents and purposes.